right. Well, with no further ado, we are headed off into the show tonight. And thanks everybody for coming in. Hopefully, whether you've done this a million times or it's your first time, I think you're going to be really happy you came in here today. And it's always good to prepare. The race is a long ways away. It's January, but it's right around the corner. And in terms of some of the stuff Austin was talking about, sail and preparations, that has to be now. So Chris Bedford and I, as we said in the preamble show, we created Marine Weather University, an all online school teaching marine weather. We've got dozens of different classes in there. And we created it during COVID when we were going, hey, what do we do? And it was a great opportunity, and maybe the last chance, or a very rare chance, to get as much of Chris's time as we did. And he had a curriculum that he really wanted to share and build out into a full-length course. So we did all that, and since then we've had over 6,000 students come through our classes. So super proud with Marine Weather University, and have a look around. The courses I talked about, the full-length courses, the Chris's curriculum. There's the 8-class fundamentals course and the 16-class advanced course. That's like a master class. And individual classes. There's free classes as well. I've got some of my expedition and some navigation related classes in there, and we'll be doing some instrument tuning coming up this year. So lots there at the university. Not all of it do you have to pay for. All right, let's take a big step back, even though this class has a specific topic to it. The offshore sailing game, what does it take to win? What does it take to succeed? One is you got to make the plan and set realistic goals. And it's sure nice to say that not every boat heading out onto the water should be planning to win, or their realistic goal should not be to win, even though it'd be nice. I mean, we've all gone out and done races where our goal wasn't to win, but thinking about where you are, where your team is, your boat may be new, who knows what the situation is. Be realistic about it, and be realistic based on the amount of practice time and et cetera you have. Preparation, there's nothing that can replace the preparation. As Dennis Conner said, time is the enemy of an American scup team. And the preparation, the time that you can spend, whether I'll be talking about the navigator and Chris will be talking about the weather here, but in all different departments of the program, is super valuable. The offshore sailing game, what does it take to win? It's sailing fast day and night on a boat where you're shorthanded. So usually, Bermuda race is not a sprint, and you're going to have to stand a watch system, even if you're sailing one of those old teams. And so it's a little bit different sailing than a lot of the racing that we do, and a lot of the boats do. So that requires a shift. Maybe it makes sense to practice some of that stuff, that shorthanded sailing at night before the race. I know there's Block Island race and some of the other early races, and some boats even do an overnight practice session. And you have to optimize human performance, setting up the sleep and the watch system that you're going to work for your boat, organizing the food, the clothing, so everybody's warm and dry, or cool and not baked in the sun, and good decision making. I mean, this is just sort of big picture, and but keep these points in mind as you're preparing in the race. And then the star of our show tonight, whether it's strategy and navigation, you got to go the right way. And that's the bonus on top of all the other preparation. Go fast, good sails, good equipment, practice, and then go the right way. Good recipe for success. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Bedford, who is currently the meteorologist for our U.S. America's Cup Challenger in Barcelona, American Magic. He was there for a number of months this summer, and he's also working all the time. Currently, he's doing some work with one of the old team boats sailing around the world faster than anybody's ever done. Hey, Chris, how's it going?
It's going great. I appreciate that, Peter. And yes, I do seem to be working all the time. In fact, you may see messages pop up in the bottom part of my screen while I'm talking here. Those are messages coming from the boat that is currently southwest of Australia. So I'll be
Give us a peek of what it looks like to be doing your shoreside.
well, you'll be able to see them. They're all in French, so you'll only be able to see them if they're in French, unless they're directed toward me. So I only worry about the ones that are in English. Um, but yeah, so basically they have I have their data coming in live right now. I can see exactly where they are, what the winds are doing, how where they're going, the speed, et cetera, et cetera. And we have constant text going back and forth between the boat, pictures, graphics, videos, all kinds of things. So it's as if you're right there with them. But there's three routers in France right now that I work with, and they do the majority of the communication with Charles on the boat, and I'm basically supporting them. So it is a busy job. Although there's only one man on the boat, it seems like he does not sleep. In June, what we have is the Bermuda High is our big weather feature out here, and this is the thing that drives the winds for most of this race here. And the reason that is there is because relative to the land, the ocean is cool, and so cool pressure, atmospheric pressure, is directly proportional to temperature. So where we have cooler air, we tend to have higher pressure. Where we have warmer air, we tend to have lower pressure. And so what we see is over the continents, throughout the northern hemisphere, which are warmer in the summer, of course, we tend to see low pressure. So there tends to be lower pressure over North America, high pressure over the North Atlantic, and this is what creates this weather pattern. And the circulation of air around it is such that we have basically sort of southwest winds along the east coast of the United States in that circulation around the Bermuda High. Now, as I said, that's the average, but in order to make an average, we have to have variability. And as Paul Kayard said, the average wind speed is 10 knots. It either blows 0 or it blows 20. And that's what makes up an average. And in this case here, what causes this weather map to vary are the active storm tracks, which are typically coming across North America, basically from west to east at a slightly higher latitude this time of year. There's also a secondary storm track that comes up off the southeastern United States. That's not as active in June as it would be, say, in the springtime, but it does sometimes appear. And so when those storm systems and fronts come off the East Coast, what they do is they press this ridge that extends out of the Bermuda High, they press it south. And when they do that, they tend to push the southwest winds further off the coast, and then we can get an intrusion of northwesterlies. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. Alternatively, if the storm track is not active, then this ridge axis here can actually move to the north and actually can go over Bermuda or even sometimes north of Bermuda. Sometimes, as I'll show you again, sometimes you actually get east winds at Bermuda because it's on the south side of the ridge. And so the wind actually shifts around into the east. But this is the average position of the Bermuda High. And as you're leading up to the race, you should start looking at the surface analysis charts from NOAA, and they'll show you what the snapshot is at any particular moment compared to that average. So here I've put up last year's surface chart, and what we see here is that the Bermuda High was actually pretty weak at this time. So at the start of last year's of the last race, rather 2022, we had the high was sort of shifted to the north and kind of a weak ridge extending down to the southeast. There was a big cutoff low over the central North Atlantic. That's what was causing this weakness in the Bermuda High. At the same time, there was a frontal system moving off the out of North America toward the New England coast and down toward the waters south of New England as well. And so that was the picture that we started out with. And to get these charts, just if you're not familiar, you should be familiar with these charts. You just want to go to this web address right down here. That's where you can pick those up. Now, in addition to that, we have other information we can look at, and we do that. For example, we download models and current GRIB files. So this is a retrospective model that I've downloaded, one that was basically showing as close as we have to the actual conditions that occurred prior to the start of the race in 2022. And I've laid out the surface chart that NOAA developed, and then on top here, I've laid down the red lines or the isobars that the model showed, and then the colors and the arrows and streamlines here show us what the wind was doing. And so we had a southwest wind actually accelerating off the coast here at this around the start, basically in a prefrontal position. Remember, ahead of a cold front, the wind is typically from the southwest. The cold front goes through and the wind shifts to the northwest. So we were getting an acceleration between the high pressure ridge to the south here and the trough axis that marked where that cold front was. The winds inside the high pressure ridge, where we have weak gradient, are very light. And you'll also notice that there is a wind shift there due to the circulation around the high pressure. So there were actually east winds, as I indicated, sometimes happen at Bermuda. And then there were south and southwest winds on the other side of that high pressure ridge. So this is kind of a nice, powerful tool that that you can use, and you can do this during the race. You can, and using a piece of software like Expedition, you can input the surface analysis from NOAA and overlay your GRIB file and compare your GRIB file to the analysis. It sometimes can be quite helpful. Then here's the actual weather the following day. So the day after the start, we see that ridge got pushed hard to the south east, and that cold front came off the coast. It's actually marked as a double cold front. And for those of you that were in the race in 2022, remember that we had a front go through and a big wind shift and a push of northwest wind that came down the rhumb line on the second day. And that substantially changed sort of the race from that point forward into mostly a downwind race, and also a little bit of a stormy, unstable race as well. And you can see by the 2 days after the start, the cold front was making its way all the way toward Bermuda. This was actually a pretty strong cold front, kind of strong for this time of year. Oftentimes the cold fronts don't quite make it all the way to Bermuda. Sometimes they hang up right around the Gulf Stream, right up through here, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, where there's a lot of warmer water that kind of slows down the cold fronts as they move toward the south. And but in this case, we had this very strong front that made it all the way down to Bermuda. So another thing you're always looking at is that Gulf Stream. A great place to get satellite images of the Gulf Stream is here at Rutgers University. This is my go-to for satellite imagery of the Gulf Stream. And what we're looking at here, of course, is the water temperature. And they've created a computer enhancement here that is very detailed on the water temperature. So it helps you pick out those weather features, those Gulf Stream features that are very important and help you understand what the current is doing around the Gulf Stream. One thing we're always interested in is sort of the north wall. Where is that north boundary of the strongest current? And so I've just marked that in here with this purple line. And then also any other features, warm eddies that you might have meandering to the north of the Gulf Stream, or cold eddies to the south. Those can be super important features. And they're important, of course, mainly to try and either get some favorable current to help push you along the course faster to Bermuda, or to avoid adverse current if the current is going against you. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that the sea state is oftentimes very closely linked in to the Gulf Stream. And so, for example, when you have southwest flow, like in a typical sort of average Bermuda High situation, you'll have southwest flow that is going with the current, and therefore the sea state is decreased. Alternatively, if you were to have easterly winds over the Gulf Stream, then you can develop very short, steep waves over the Gulf Stream. And that, of course, can be a slower slog as you're heading toward the south. In addition to those things, we're also looking for we have other resources available. This here is altimetry, and this is the current, which is calculated by measuring the average sea surface height. And from that you can do a similar type of calculation that you do in the atmosphere, calculating the wind between high pressure and low pressure. You can do the same thing by calculating the current between areas of higher water and lower water. And this is very valuable in marking the strong features associated with the Gulf Stream. And then you can overlay that information on top of your sea surface data, and it helps you to sort of define what sort of current speeds you'll be looking at in different parts of the Gulf Stream. Now, keep in mind that the altimetry data is not a forecast; it is an observation. And it is also a little bit slow to respond to changes into the current. The sea surface temperature is a snapshot, and so it will show you what the current is doing at any given time. One of the downsides, of course, of the sea surface temperature is if there is cloud, then the satellite can't see what the temperature of the sea surface is. However, in the case of the altimetry, that is cloud penetrating radar, so it can actually see through any clouds there. And so there's some advantages to both of those things, depending. Now, looking at the average winds again across the Atlantic at this time of year, this is sort of the average wind field that has been put together by satellite measured winds. One thing you'll notice is the same sort of pattern that I pointed out before, where we have lighter winds in the high pressure and a ridge axis down here, lighter winds within that, and then stronger winds across the between the ridge and the average lower pressure over the land. But another thing you'll notice how the strongest winds are very close to where the Gulf Stream is. The reason for that is because of that warmer water, we have deeper mixing in the atmosphere. Basically, the warm water allows the atmosphere to mix through a deeper layer and pull down stronger winds from aloft down to the surface. So very often you have stronger winds over the Gulf Stream than you do over the colder water, especially to the north of the Gulf Stream, where that colder water actually creates an inversion and prevents the atmosphere from mixing. So again, another interesting thing about knowing where the Gulf Stream is. It can actually help you with that. Now, one thing I've done here is, again, just to kind of look at what the wind does along the route, is I've got frequency data for each one of these locations. So first off is a wind rose for this star that's just off the starting area. And for those of you not familiar with wind roses, they are frequency diagrams that show us the percent of time that the wind blows from a different direction. And so the length of this petal is telling us how often the wind blows from that direction. So in the case of this petal pointed toward the southwest, there we go, pointed toward the southwest, 22% of the time the wind is from the southwest at this first point here. And then you can see the distribution. So there's a lot of southwesterlies, again, right in line with that average flow around the Bermuda High. And then you can see there are some other directions scattered about. The colors in the petals indicate the frequency of time that the wind blows in these wind directions down here, 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, etc. And you can see that one of the interesting things is oftentimes the strongest winds in this particular location are not from the most frequent direction. They're from these northeast directions. And so when we have storm systems, which are usually what's driving these cases of northeast wind, that's when we'll have our strongest winds as well. So that's another kind of interesting thing you can pick up from looking at these wind roses. Now, as we go down the track more toward the Gulf Stream, we see that the distribution continues about the same, a little bit more emphasis of these southwest winds. Again, we're getting further offshore, closer to the ridge axis. And then if we go down to the south west again, we see two things. We see a higher percentage of westerly component in the breeze. In other words, instead of the southwest winds being the most frequent, now it's sort of the southwest and west southwest. So again, that's that circulation around the ridge axis. The other thing we see is that the average wind speed is increased. If we look at the sort of the width and the colors within each one of these petals, we see we're now emphasizing stronger winds. And that goes right along with what I said. As we get into that warmer water, the atmosphere mixes air and brings down hot air from aloft. And the wind is from the west-southwest. That's by far 27% of the time. And then some other directions are also thrown in there. Now, as we get closer to Bermuda, the weather starts to get a little bit more variable. And this is, again, because the ridge axis is very close to Bermuda, it can actually shift to the north. And you'll see that there is a higher frequency of easterly winds showing up in Bermuda there. So once you get close to Bermuda, the weather patterns start to get a little bit less predictable, a little bit less reliable because of the position of that ridge axis. So again, really good to keep those average conditions in mind. Now, I have put together a set of historical GRIBs for this race. They go back, I think, to 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And you can download them from my website, which you need to create a login. Once you've done that, then you can just download this. And there's some pretty powerful stuff you can do. These are GRIB files, quarter-degree resolution, 1 hour resolution for June. And so you can start running routes through those historically. And so I highly recommend that you do that. Now's the time to do it because you have the time on your hands. And one of the things you can do is you can run a series of routes through that historical weather database and look and see what sort of routes sort of fall out from it. And there's other information that you can gather from these studies as well. And so here I've just put a few examples: J120, XP44, etc. The average speed to finish the race, the fastest race, the slowest race. Again, these are modeled, so they're not real. But this data is as close as we're going to get to what actually occurred in each one of these cases. And from that information, you can put together these frequency tables, which give you information on the typical true wind angles and speeds that you could be sailing in this race. And from that, you kind of identify these hot spots of upwind and reaching, etc., that you're going to be seeing in this race. And then one thing you'll notice is that, one year will have more upwind and less reaching or less downwind. Another year might have a lot of downwind and less upwind. And so there is some variability year to year. And the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, we don't know exactly what's going to happen this year. So these types of studies kind of give you an idea of sort of the envelope of possibilities that you might be looking at going forward. So a really valuable tool. I highly recommend that you take advantage of that. And with that, Peter, I will shift it over to you. You're on mute, Peter. Peter, you're muted. Yep, there you
Copy
go.
that. Sorry about that. Thank you, Chris. Fascinating. How about a little bit of Q&A with Chris while we're here? And I've got some. I know you kicked off your slides with people talk about ENSO or La Nina or El Nino and ask you, hey, how's the Bermuda race going to be different this year because we're in this particular phase I read about in the newspaper. Can you give just repeat again so that nobody asks that question again?
Yeah,
Irresponsible.
all that matters is the weather on the day. So we're just looking at one day of weather for this race to start. If you had a choice to, say, start a different day, then you might look at sort of these features like El Nino, La Nina, and, would it be better to start the end of May versus the second or third week of June or something like that. But in this case, we have one day. It's already been told to us when we have to start. So El Nino, La Nina don't matter. We just need to worry about the weather on that particular day. And everything else, like all those frequency tables that I showed you, there are El Nino cases in there. There are La Nina cases in there. They are accounted for within that envelope of possibilities.
Okay, so that's great. Thank you. The those historical averages that you showed the spreadsheet of true wind angle and true wind speed bins that can give us an idea of historical averages that can help us in getting our head around the average contingencies of the race. And I've been on some boats which actually might even go to their sailmaker and optimize their sail plan based on sort of big picture averages. And if you're in a El Nino versus a La Nina year, would you hedge from the historical averages that you do, or no, because they're all in that same bin?
Yeah. Yeah. If you look at the standard deviations, it's not enough to respond to. I mean,
Okay.
you'd be taking an unnecessary gamble or a risk if you did that.
All right. We got a couple questions there. I'll just answer a couple. What software did Chris use to generate those hotspot charts? I do believe that once he got the historical GRIBs, which he's sharing with you and worth playing around with and practicing with you navigators, that's really a nice treat there. He used a routing program, probably Expedition. There's only a few out there that can really do the heavy lifting, especially with a big historical average where you're going over many years like that, and then exporting the optimum results and filtering it in a spreadsheet program like Excel. The Okay, Chris. So Bermuda race, when I first did the Bermuda race, we didn't use GRIB files. Now we have GRIB files for current, we have GRIB files for wind, which help us with when we're using a routing program like Expedition or Adrena or some other program to, on the day or maybe even watch to watch, start coming up with our tactics and strategy. The Is there one question I had? Have you found any historical current GRIB or an average current GRIB that you could throw in with that average, with the average routing you did?
Yes, there is an equivalent from the Copernicus data set. So yes, you can do that. I do caution though that most of the routing sensitivity within those tables is from weather, and it's probably by 2 orders of magnitude. And so when you start to put current in, you're starting to deviate away from actually showing the impact of the weather, which is really the driving force. If you're doing routing studies in the sense of in 1998, was it a Rumline year or was it a Go West year? Then those historical files can be quite meaningful. But from the type of analysis that I just showed, you actually start to sort of add an additional uncertainty essentially to the analysis, which you don't really need to do.
Yeah, for what you're getting out of those historical runs, you're not, it's not the east or west as much as that other information like those tables that you come up with. It's super valuable. Okay, on race day, come race time, again, back in the old days, we would have maybe some um, satellite images of the temperature of the water and maybe try to figure out how to draw them on our charts and plot the north wall of the Gulf Stream and where the eddies were, et cetera, and come up with some ideas of where to go. Of course, we were sailing slower boats. For a lot of us were back then. The boats have sped up. A lot of the boats are super fast now, and the slower a boat is, the more you have to pay attention to the current in any race. But fast forward to 2024, we have, tons of satellite data available. We have a number of GRIB files, which I presume are pulled from the satellite data, just like the wind files are, GRIB files at times, and other times are using, some sort of theoretical modeling to extrapolate into the future. What would be best practices with respect to preparing and getting the information on the day for a navigator come this year? Would you
Well,
recommend?
yeah, I think kind of very, very roughly sort of the analysis that I showed, where you start with the SST imagery, because as I said, the SST imagery is assuming we're not cloud cover, which can be a big assumption, or even just, a couple of days prior, because current doesn't change that much day to day. It changes a little bit. And quite frankly, if you are basing your race on a particular feature that is that sensitive, you're taking a lot of risk, because either way, even in the best circumstances, you can't be 100% certain that that feature is going to be there when you get there. So you want to be a little bit careful about, basing your routing on some small feature. But I think doing that, cross-checking with the altimetry data, which gives you, which is nice because it's constant, doesn't change a lot day to day, and does show the big features. And that's really what we're most interested in, are the big features. The smaller features are here today, gone tomorrow. And you want to be careful about routing on those. So I think sort of that analysis that I showed you is cross-checking with the altimetry. GRIB files, forecast GRIB files are really nice of the current, but if you think forecasting the weather is difficult, forecasting current is even harder.
Okay, the truth. I will just put a little another step back. We're talking about the routing tools, the incredible plethora of weather models that are available in GRIB format, and also current models, and you can just press a button and get the golden road to the fastest course. And I would highly recommend for any of you that use this device to figure out, oh, my favorite weather app, what the weather is going to be tomorrow. Chris has a great class in Marine Weather University on weather models and talks about the more you understand how weather models are made, the more you understand their strengths, their weaknesses, and their limitations. And even when you get to the highest level of Grand Prix sailing and world-class meteorology, there are still limitations with that information. And I'm sorry to say, but the Stan Honeys and the women and the men that are to make adding value to the routing that they get once they use a routing tool like predict wind or whatever tool you use, those are the ones that are really, going to succeed on average in the long run, because the weather models, no matter how good they are, do have limitations. Anything to add there, Chris?
No, it's totally correct. If you knew how weather models really work, you probably would never want to look at one ever again. There's a lot of uncertainty that just sort of piles up. And there's uncertainty not just in the weather model, but also in the routing software, your polar of your boat. And you just start to add up all these bits of uncertainty. And you realize that you still have to do the hard work of looking out outside the boat at what the weather is doing and sailing the boat fast at whatever angle, you know, you're sailing at and so forth. It's really, it still comes down to sailing at the end of the day, despite all the technology.
Very, very important. Please let that resonate with you. The Bermuda race, more than just about any offshore race I can think of, has this sort of lore and this, you know, the feeling like that there's magic. There's like this sweet spot that, you know, that boat got to and the other boat did, the other boats didn't, that make the difference in the race. And, you know, there's no magic about it. And it's not always going to be given to you, but the more you understand, whether you understand the physical principles involved, it doesn't mean getting a degree in meteorology. It means you investing in your sport. You spend time learning how to trim your sails faster. And the same thing is, the more you can interpret for what you see in the clouds and be able to interpret and come up with theories or reasons why the weather model or a particular thing is blown, you're going to be adding value that's going to be super valuable on the race course. Knowledge is power. All right. Thanks so much, Chris. Oh, one more thing. You mentioned a little bit with the average conditions in the points along the race course, and we looked at those the petals of the wind roses. Any sort of general advice as to when we do get into the Gulf Stream? I'll talk a little bit about the wind, the current effect on wind if the wind stayed the same, but the wind doesn't stay the same because of it's like its own microclimate out there. And I'm sure it varies depending on whether we're in a northeasterly or southwesterly, but give us a minute or two on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the abrupt change that occurs as you're sailing from north of the Gulf Stream to south of the Gulf Stream is not to be unrecognized, and it all has to do with the mixing of the atmosphere. So where you have cold water and you have warm air going over the cold water, it creates an inversion, and when you have an inversion, it decouples the flow. So the gradient, and sometimes even the models may say you should be sailing in 20 knots, but you're looking across, particularly south of New England, that time of year, you're looking across a glassy sea because the water is so cold, it just cannot mix down to the surface. And so you're in two different worlds, and your wind sensor at the top of the rig can be reading something completely different from what you're seeing on the deck. And then you sail through the Gulf Stream, and all of a sudden, now the layer is warm and it's mixed, and now it's behaving in a very different way. You'll oftentimes see cumulus clouds, sometimes showers or squalls that build up over the Gulf Stream. That's because it's acting like as a heat source, and it's drawing cooler air into it. That heat source has rising air, it forms clouds and sometimes cells. So you have completely different weather over the Gulf Stream oftentimes than you do on really on either side of it, but especially from the north side. So it's not to be trifled with.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get into the navigator side of the game. And again, thanks everybody for coming, and thanks to North for having Chris and I. We love doing this sort of thing and getting out in the real world with all you guys. Navigating the Bermuda race. Okay, so we're going to talk about preparation, instruments, polars, weather. We've talked a bit about Gulf Stream routing and data access. Let's dive into it. There's a navigator hard at work. Probably looks like it's pretty flat, a flat, unheeled boat. That might be Pyewacket or Santa Cruz 70 in the Transpac race. Let's talk about the navigator skill set, just running down the bullet points here. You can divide this up any way you like, just like a company divides up what the COO does or the CFO, but somebody, normally the navigator, is responsible for sailing instruments, the operations and the calibrations. Calibrations never end. The instruments and the data that you provide to the sailing team on deck is super important, and making that as accurate as possible and having the right information in an easy to view place is going to be helpful. And that's your job to end interfacing with the sailing team. You got to be good with networking and computers, or have a young family member who can help you set it up if you're all thumbs with that sort of stuff. Sailing software operation interfacing. Chris talked about doing those early historical routings with that GRIB file he has there. You navigators, it helps to practice. If you just, the more you practice with your go-to program, come race day, in the middle of the race, when you're sleep deprived and you have a dodgy connection, you can only get so much information. The ability to be able to be a master of those tools. Expedition's my favorite software, but whatever routing software you do, being good at it, and then practice makes good perfect. I like practicing with Yellow Brick too, or the race tracking features as well ahead of time. So I look for races that are happening before the race and to practice. Like we'll be doing on the West Coast, we have the Islands race coming up in a couple of weeks. That'll be a Yellow Brick race, and you can practice routing it and tracking it. And the same thing with the San Diego to Puerto Vallarta race, both in February. Caribbean 600 comes on the heels. It's good practice. Practice, practice, practice your weather routing, and that'll get your weather routing and race tracking going. Communication, super important skill all across the boat, but especially for the navigator. It does no good if you have the information, but the crew, you're playing a game with telephone. Everybody's sleep deprived, and you only get little bits of time with the crew unless you go on deck and do something that Chris talked about, and that is look at the sky, not just the computer. You also got to be good at bailing. That's the navigator's job. A little cooking maybe, or at least boiling water on a lot of race boats, and old school navigation. I remember the first Bermuda race I did, I was basically the skipper, if you will. I steered at the start. The owner was the navigator. And come dawn the second morning, wake up, and we are with boats that are like 5-10 feet bigger than us. Super excited. All right. Richard, the owner, we're giving a slap on the back. We sailed well, but boy, you put us in the right place. And he comes up sheepishly and says, Peter, this was a long time ago, so it was before the computer navigation tools. Because the rum line to Bermuda is actually 13 degrees different than what I told you, ×2, because I was doing the variation wrong. I was using true degrees. So actually Bermuda's over here and not straight ahead, but sometimes the blind squirrel gets the nut, right? Let's talk about instrument tuning. This is something that if you're going to be using your instruments come race day and using your polars to do routing, you have to do this homework. Calibration is ongoing. You never stop doing calibration. You will try to set up your wind speed and boat speed calibrations as best you can, but wind calibration never ends. Part of it has to do with that mixing information, that phenomena that Chris talked about, and is so obvious in the Sound and Rhode Island Sound during the springtime. Boat speed cals. I'll be doing a free course for sponsored by the Pacific Cup in a couple weeks, pacificcup.com, on instrument tuning. You want to dive into this more, and how to get boat speed, the processes I use. Ultimately, until you have your instruments sorted, the best polars that you could use are the VPP results that your design comes out with. Just make sure you know whether it's masthead or 10-meter wind, that their true wind speed is scaled with. Once you get your instruments sorted, then you can start adding value to your polars. And a really well calibrated boat, it takes a while, can actually start improving on the designer's VPP polars and all that. Garbage in, garbage out in weather routing, but less garbage is better. The weather information ahead of time, you're preparing and figuring out what sources of information you're going to be using during the race. It's always a little bit of maybe you guys all have Starlinks for this race. We're starting to experiment with that on our boats, and maybe we'll be just like at home. But old school, or those of you who are using Iridium Go or the Iridium Go Executive, which is really the Certus 100, you know, the reality is we can't get as much data as we have at home. So it pays to prepare. So you know which pieces of information you can get and how to get to it directly. I create cheat sheets so that I can, with the links all made up of like the ones that Chris shared with us earlier, so that I don't have, you're not going to be doing browsing unless, of course, you do have the Starlink. Chris talked a little bit about the psychology of navigation and strategy, the fear of missing out, the fear of a better option. You know what? So nowadays you can get the HRR every hour, and you always think, "Oh gosh, I got to get the HRR." You know, and that I can't go to sleep. But I can't tell you how many times I've gone back and just reviewed my notes or the report that Chris did a day before the start, and just take a deep breath and say, okay, the conditions remain the same, the big picture remains the same, and how accurate that can be. It's not always about just getting the latest and best thing. And going back to school, Marine Weather University classes, not a bad idea. Here's an example of, you know, one of the, Nick White in the expedition has built some great ability to get information into expedition. You actually can get this chart here right now, which is at the Ocean Prediction Center. Chris shared those links for ocean.gov and all the information you can get there. Of course, a human drawn and interpreted weather map is a piece of information that in this digital age of GRIB files, you often forget about, but there's actually a pro behind this. They put their name on it when they do the analysis, and it's a worthwhile piece of information even out on the water. There's an example of the cheat sheets, you know, the links of all the different places, but preparation ahead of time. All right, we talked in the Q&A about the Gulf Stream, but you have to understand when you're doing a race like this, what the basic effect of current on wind. And I've got a navigating a Bermuda race course in the Isler Academy at Marine Weather University, which goes into much greater depth than we get to here on a lot of these subjects, and has some practical quizzes and examples of how you can get your head around the vectors of current and wind. Understanding the temperature effects that Chris was talking about, and having, you know, your head around the graphics and the models for Gulf Stream information. There's an example of a GRIB file put into Expedition. And that, you know, will help to, in the big picture at least, when you're routing, it'll help to identify where the slot is you want to go. But again, it's not going to pick up those really fine short-term changes that might have an effect in the race. So you get, you know, what you've got. Chris showed the ensemble routing or historical routing, and before the race, I'll start doing the ensemble routing where I'll download a number of global models. It's not really high resolution, and it's practicing my expedition skills and getting my head around the potential strategy for the race. Understanding the limitations of weather models. There is a result of an expedition of an ensemble routing. And again, if you're interested in getting deeper into this, check out the Bermuda race class at Isler Academy and Marine Weather University. There's another example of the heat diagram that you can produce out of expedition, whether you use a few models or hundreds. In this case, I'm probably use dozens of them to produce that. Wind speed going up on the left on the and on the y-axis, and the x-axis is the true wind angle, getting narrower and getting wider. I talked about Chris's weather models classes, the advanced class weather models 201. That's a great class. Okay, navigating the Bermuda race, communication. Let's spend a minute talking about this here. Your communication of how you communicate with the crew is good. And when I'm coaching race teams, I do a little bit of this in the navigators. I actually have them practice doing a briefing, like the watch change briefing. The watch captain comes down to the nav station. They get a few minutes with the navigator to look through stuff. The navigator gives them an overview of where we are and where the other guys are and what the forecast is and what the big picture strategy is. And if this happens, then let's think about this. All that can be done much more efficiently if you practice it and you use the same language, structured nomenclature, and people understand how the brains of the different people work. So practicing actually just doing that is a worthwhile exercise. Get buy-in. It's really important to know. I've seen navigators just work, okay, we're jibing now, but I want my team to all understand what the big picture is and why we're sailing VMC mode rather than VMG mode right now. To me, I think it's important to have everybody on the boat bought in and thinking about not only what the strategy is, but what the race crew is doing to achieve that strategy. If we get lifted 20 degrees, then we're going to shift from VMC to VMG mode. That sort of thing. Especially when the navigator takes naps from time to time or spends time down below, it's great when the sail team on deck can go down in the puffs and up in the lulls or whatever the plan is in big picture strategy world. For the navigator, I'm just going to reiterate, which we talked about before, super important to spend time on deck. It's a great time to do the briefings that maybe you don't have or you don't have room for to do down below next to the computer. Have an iPad in a waterproof case so you can show, position reports and strategy and weather routing on deck. And navigator spending time on deck just to take a look at the conditions, watch how the wind's oscillating. All those sort of things are very valuable and make you more of a sailing navigator rather than a tech navigator. And all the best sailing navigators in the world all the best navigators in the world are good sailors too, and understand the importance of spending time on deck. Don't wake up surprised anytime if I do go down for a cat nap. I try not to stand to watch as a navigator, but to float. And then I employ that really short-term sleep, 30-minute, the cat nap style of resting. But anytime I lay down, I always make sure the crew on deck know that I'm lying down so that they're not assuming, oh, Peter sees that, we're lifted, but Peter must see it and I'm snoring away. And it gives you a chance to provide some guidelines. Hey, if the wind gets right of 315, wake me up. If the wind goes down below this, wake me up. But don't just say I'm going down, but have them some triggers if need be, so that you get woken up if you need it. And stay rested. This is not about plowing through. I've seen navigators who pride themselves, and I did the whole Bermuda race and never slept. Like, you must have been really inefficient. You gotta you're using your brain here, and you just start going slow if you're not rested. Let's talk about your tools. Again, just sort of big picture stuff here, but my philosophy and my partner Artie Means, when we work on setting up boats, waypoint navigation, is keep your electronic system simple. Don't get too fancy. I get on board boats with just some, big color screens on deck. I like to keep things simple, wired in whenever possible, not wireless. Everything's installed by a marine electronics professional. This is not the time to bring the owners head of IT from their company down on the boat in order to set things up. Wrong way to do it. Trained marine professional, especially the Bermuda race, could get wet down there. Let's talk about battery charging and stuff. Super important. There's always some boats in the race that break down with this or lose their data because of it. Test what you draw in daytime and nighttime on average, your amps that you're drawing down, and test your charging capability so that you are not, oh gosh, turns out we have to charge 3 times a day. Whatever it is, a little bit of practice ahead of time, whether you go out on the water, if you just at the dock, you turn on the lights at night, see where the battery is, and practice knowing what you're going to have to do during the race. Prepare your system for extreme conditions and have a backup plan. I've had the whole thing flood back there, like underwater. So I always make sure I have an iPad with navionics loaded on it and with some backup power supplies. So if everything goes down, I can find Bermuda, because that's really bad. Navigator runs onto the reef. Another thing I just want to mention, because I lived through this moment here, the Rambler 100 and this Fastnet race when keel fin broke off and 21 people floated out in 57-degree water. And luckily there was no loss of life, and it had to do with a bunch of reasons. But everybody on that crew now practices and preaches safety, and the navigator should be fluent in the man overboard button and procedure. How the navigator is going to operate in the case of a man overboard where you're not on deck but using the tools you have. Maybe you have PLBs that emit, every crew member has, that emits, excuse me, what amounts to an AIS signal that you can track. Practice doing that. Oh, excuse me, I always monitor VHF 16. I have my on-deck crew always have the handheld VHF on deck with it on, and I have mine turned on lightly down below so that I hear when I'm at the nav station. We're all brothers and sisters out on the water, and nothing, even winning the race, is more important than the lives and the safety of all of our fellow sailors out there. And best way to get help, especially in a race like Bermuda race, where you're probably always within eyesight at masthead, which is what the VHF signal has of the VHF call. That is important. I'll be listening in. I'll have my ears on when you guys are in trouble, and let's make a promise. I'll be listening for your calls for help if you'll be listening for mine. Have your emergency contact numbers, and if the proverbial thing hits the fan, you want to be able to know how to reach the Coast Guard. Obviously, Channel 16 is a very good go-to, but if you need medical help and stuff, have them programmed into your sat phone so you can call and not be looking stuff up. All right, don't be a hero, get some rest, be efficient, and practice. Hammer, hammer home. How do you practice? The Marine Weather University classes, can't stress enough how valuable they are, whether you're a dinghy sailor on the bow, or if you're going to be sailing and racing sailboats for a while. Chris Bedford's classes are the best out there. I'm really proud that we put this all together. It's all online. You can take it whenever you want. A lot of the examples and navigator skills, and also more on marine electronics. I did a Newport to Bermuda class with Stan Honey, my college roommate, who also won the business. He and Sally and team won the Bermuda race 2 years ago. And Artie Means did a class that's up there at the Marine Weather University Isler Academy. And we've got some expedition classes there and more to come. So for all of you that are here today, little gift from Chris and I, through one day after Valentine's Day, coupon code FAST SAILS will garner you a bit of a discount, and money back guaranteed. There are free courses there as well, but I highly recommend. the Marine Weather University, marineweatheru.com. Here's some of the classes again right now. We talked about the 2 full-length courses, the Advanced and Fundamentals course, Weather Models 201, the importance of understanding that. There's a great class Chris does about radar and satellite information. If you have Starlink, we can now get high-resolution satellite information that could be, finally, we could actually use that information out on the water to make some decisions. A lot of free classes like my expedition ABC's class, and a plethora of courses inside of the free goodies class. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Austin, our host for North, and thank you guys for being here, and thanking Chris for being part of the show.
Yeah, thank you guys both for joining us here tonight. I hope everyone in the talk got a lot out of it. I know I did. We used Chris for our race 2 years ago, and it turned out excellent. Could not have been happier with his services for that. So I highly recommend using him whenever you can, and taking the marine weather courses. And again, if anyone missed the part 1 where we take this weather data and the new scoring for the race and apply that to how that affects your sail selection, look at the part 1. It's at the top of the chat again. And thank you, everyone, and have a great evening. Any other questions, please feel free to email. If it's sail related, obviously email me, and then these guys can handle any of your weather or navigation questions.